Welcome, everyone. So today we're going to be discussing Just Green Cities, which is a discussion paper that we've put together with partners. So I'm Julie Wright. I'm the Director of Partners for Action, which is a research initiative run out of the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo. We focus on empowering Canadians to be flood resilient through evidence-based activities promoting awareness and preparedness actions. I also just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the Haldimand Tract, which is the land 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River that runs through southwestern Ontario. It's the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral Peoples. And this is territory that's governed by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. And I really especially like to just mention this treaty when we're talking about sustainability issues. The main tenets of the treaty are to take only what you need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. And I think that's especially salient for conversations about sustainability in cities. I just want to take a moment to introduce my partners on this project. Windfall, Ecology Center, and Possibilian Ventures. So Brent Copperson is with us, as is Michael Lukowitz. Brent is an Ashoka Fellow and founder and executive director of Windfall Ecology Center based in Aurora, Ontario. It's a social enterprise. Brent is a climate change expert, and his work at Windfall focuses on repowering communities to create lasting wealth in a carbon-constrained 21st century. Michael is a serial entrepreneur and is general partner at Possibilian Ventures, and he's working toward a better future in a number of different ways, but mostly through mission-oriented ventures. Right now, he's working on a project in the Web3 space called Super Benefit, and he's obviously a collaborator on this Just Green Cities project. This project is also funded in part by the Government of Canada's Sustainable Development Goals Funding Program, and so we really appreciate that support. So today what we're going to talk about, I'm only going to take about 20 minutes here, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And then what we want to do is move to the network rooms. So those of you who want to stay part of the conversation and have a chat about what's next, we'd love to hear from you. So we thought what we would do is just host 3 tables in that networking space and get conversation going if you're willing and able. So the first things first, I just want to talk about the SDGs since this is Together Ensemble. And I just want to acknowledge this massive politically negotiated framework. And when we're talking about just green cities, we can see a number of these goals within this framework that match up. You know, we've got infrastructure appearing in SDG 9. We've got good health and well-being, which is important for the vitality and the social equity in our cities. We've got sustainable cities and communities. And we have impacts on the life on land, life below water. We have climate action. We have affordable and clean energy. So you can see that sustainable cities are really at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think it's always important also to acknowledge that it's not a perfect framework. And in this context, it's really good to just acknowledge what's missing in this framework right off the start, but to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a very usable framework. And the thing that I have found over the last number of years working on community implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals is that it provides us with a common language to talk about issues that bridges both our environmental conversations and our conversations about social equity. And it really highlights the need for partnerships and collaboration in all the work that we're doing. The other thing I want to just acknowledge about the SDGs is that it is the greatest opportunity for data collection in this generation. And when I talk about data collection, I'm talking about data for the public good. So where we are able to invest in civic data collection, this is a gold mine. There are 232 indicators associated with the framework, and there's tremendous opportunity to localize those indicators, especially within our cities and communities. The other sort of framing element here that I want to talk about is the Paris Agreement. And, the recent IPCC report obviously hammers home how completely urgent it is for us to get on top of this and make some progress. The other thing that really jumps out to me is in the last year, we've had so much conversation about Build Back Better. I think that pretty much started spring of 2020 with the pandemic and some of the fractures that we were seeing in our systems and institutions. And also with the rush of stimulus funds that came from governments. And so this is sort of one of the reasons why we wanted to take on this project. We needed to take a big step back and look at where we are and what signals were beeping at us from the 2030 and 2050 horizons. At the same time, the equity issues that we've been struggling with, and for the most part ignoring, have bubbled to the surface during the pandemic. And if we're going to truly build back better, we have to do so much better on social equity. So I just want to put this out there, as these are two of the really big framing pieces of this Just Green Cities discussion paper. And then why cities? One of the things that we wanted to do with this paper was look at what's next. So what are the leverage points? If we're looking out to the 2030 and 2015 horizon points, what are the leverage points for us in terms of truly building back better? And obviously, in a context where half of all GHG emissions in Canada are at the local level and under some form of municipal decision-making control, we wanted to look at how that could be leveraged. The other really important part of this municipal framing is that it's where at the local level that important lasting relationships can be developed with equity-seeking groups. This is where people know each other. They encounter each other on the street, through neighborhood activities, through the community organizations that they're part of, through their schools, through their workplaces. And so there's just so much connective tissue that can be invested in at that scale. This discussion paper frames things in an integrated way and offers a flexible framework for further discussion. So it's also important that we're not done with this discussion paper. It's really the beginning of what we're hoping will be a much broader conversation. For instance, we didn't apply an overt reconciliation framing in this document, and for that, we need to partner with Indigenous groups, and we also need to support and acknowledge Indigenous-led work. So that I just want to put that out front as well. I think importantly, what we want to do is examine the questions that we put forth in this paper. And we're going to talk a little bit about the how first, and then we'll get into the main points that come through in the executive summary. So the main question that we really wanted to ask here is about operationalizing equity-driven changes at the municipal level. Like I said, we have these signals beeping at us from the horizon, 2030 and 2050, and there's kind of a work back or backcasting exercise that needs to happen in order for us to realize the kind of progress that we need. And identified earlier in the Paris Agreement slides, we're dealing with a little bit of an ambition gap here. Some people would say we're dealing with a lot of ambition gap in the Canadian context. So it's really important that we treat this urgently. So the way that we tackled this was we had a number of, there were 3 research interns that joined Partners for Action last summer and conducted literature reviews on each of the topics. And so one of the things that they focused on most was, what sort of signals are we seeing? What is the state of play in terms of our commitments to the Paris Agreement? How are we doing on the Sustainable Development Goals? How is equity cropping up in the literature that exists to date? We conducted 4 topic scoping workshops. This is where we brought broader communities around these specific topics and the specific cases that we were developing. We had contributions from 44 individuals across 36 organizations, and we generated quite a bit of transcript material that our lead writer graciously reviewed in great detail. And really what we came up with through this process was a way of looking at municipal decision-making using both the equity and the climate change, financial equity as lenses. So this Venn diagram, I think, just sort of clearly shows the intersection. So if one were to take an integrated approach to decision-making at the municipal level, you really need to be at the heart there in that gray center. And the cases that we focused on are net zero housing, stormwater management, and fleet electrification. So I think it's also important to bring up why these three particular cases. It's pretty obvious housing and transportation are a juggernaut for most municipalities. They are the two greatest sources of GHG emissions at the local level. And stormwater infrastructure, in many communities, it's invisible to us, and yet more money is put towards stormwater infrastructure than to our roads, which is often a surprise to municipal residents. I mean, it's just not something that that's top of mind. In the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card, yes, we actually produce an infrastructure report card. It's really demonstrating that we're lagging behind and that we've been deferring investments in stormwater infrastructure for a long time because it is an invisible asset. So the common elements between these three, number one is probably land use. All three of these cases have a very, very strong association with land use and land planning. And they involve the intersection of diverse communities and different kinds of built infrastructure. They have public and private interests. And there's a tremendous amount of capital that flows into these three areas. And in some cases, that one of the strongest things that emerged from our research was the need for issue reframing. And in terms of issue reframing, I think the one thing that jumps forward too is that even as just a citizen of a community, you have a role to play in this. There's always something that you can do. And so part of the issue reframing is to figure out who plays what roles within municipal decision-making. The scenario planning process that we undertook focused on 4 key drivers of change. So the social equity factor, the sustainable financial equity, and this is, we really wanted to bring in sustainable finance into this conversation to kind of mainstream it as a lens. Too often, sustainable finance gets kicked down the road as a nice to have, and we have really, really big global pieces moving into place where we can't afford to not incorporate sustainable financial equity into any of our decision making anymore. It's, like the 2030 and 2050 plans that we're making now, that backcasting process really requires us to make capital investments today, and we don't want to end up with capital flowing in the wrong direction. So sustainable financial equity has to be at the heart of these conversations. Obviously, the climate emergency. I mean, we have more than 500 communities across Canada who have made climate emergency declarations. So it has to be front and center. And then fourthly, as I had mentioned previously, this issue of municipal infrastructure renewal, the deferral of investment in municipal infrastructure is quite a significant issue for us. So the first case, equity-driven net zero housing. So I think it's important just to think about the context here. For instance, in Toronto, buildings account for 55% of the city's GHG emissions. There's embodied carbon in there, so that's the carbon that goes into buildings. It's in the concrete, literally in the concrete. 2/3 of these buildings are residential, and one of the things that we used as sort of a touch case right at the very beginning was the Towers in the Park model in Toronto. That's referred to in the report. You can dig in a little bit there, but it sort of gives a perfect example of how this Venn diagram works, where you've got communities of people living vertically in buildings that are slowly crumbling. They haven't been maintained equitably. They have limited access to green space and other co-benefits from a more sort of sustainable building model. And they are in desperate need of retrofit. And so how you approach retrofit to net zero in the case of towers in the park is really, it's a big issue. In order to take an equity-based lens, you'd really need to be accommodating people and finding either swing housing or some format for their lives to not be completely disrupted by building retrofit. So in the context of this, we asked, how do we engage ESG, so that's environmental and social governance driven financial equity, to achieve equitable, affordable net zero housing, to mitigate the climate change emergency. So we know that this is one of the big cornerstone issues in municipal GHG reduction, and it's a complex issue. In Toronto and in Vancouver, so there were some signals and signs, that this is definitely what we wanted to focus on. It was, what are we hearing? What's in the moment? So we've got new stuff coming from Toronto and Vancouver. They're moving from strategy to implementation. So that's really an important factor in here. There are new tools. So Race to Zero, the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor, and in the discussion paper, these tools are hyperlinked. And we've got affordable housing, which is, a national issue. We've got task forces and, special budget lines at the federal level to direct new capital and finance toward affordable housing. But in the context of affordable housing and net zero housing, we've got to have some conversations. And this is where, we wanted to kind of get an understanding of what are some of the ingredients, what are some of the push-pull factors that are at the table. So in the case of net zero housing, we have financing hurdles, uncertainty around return on investment and a risk adverse industry. We've got a disjoint between the small size of proposed projects for net zero housing and the larger opportunities that are sought by investors. And this is something it's recurring across both the fleet electrification and net zero housing. We also need a basic set of tenets that guide equitable retrofit projects, especially of rental properties. What is good practice? And we also need to build financing models that include co-benefits. And so really pushing forward the health and well-being framing around the co-benefits is so important. And it's a major part of how we would market net zero housing if we were doing it in the best possible way. Throughout the discussion paper, we were able to incorporate quotes from our participants. We did conduct the workshops under Chatham House rules, so nothing is attributed to individuals, but we got really fantastic quotes from our participants and contributors, and so they are sprinkled throughout the report. So the policy takeaways are pretty tight. Now is the time to be having this conversation, especially for moving from strategy to implementation. We need to get more voices at the table, and we need to move beyond the moral imperative on net zero housing and really push it as crucial to the health and well-being of our communities. Policy integration and coherence is also really important. I mean, we've got to get this combination of 3 layers of government. We've got to thread the needle there. And then, as always, there are carrots and sticks to any sort of issue like this, where you need to get the incentives in place in order for equity-based net zero housing, to get to a spot where you've got incentives and then you've got some regulatory processes that help you get to the targets. I'm just going to move on quickly to stormwater management. So that was case number 2, and we will do a little Q&A after this. So you'll have a chance to ask any questions that are popping up for you, and please use the chat wherever it's relevant for you. So this is kind of in the Partners for Action wheelhouse. Climate change related flooding is the thing that all Canadian communities can expect to experience in the face of climate change in Canada. So many of our communities are settled along major water routes, and we're increasingly vulnerable to extreme rainfall. So this is really threat number one for municipal water systems. We wanted to look specifically at how climate change related adaptations could achieve sustainable municipal stormwater infrastructure. So applying social equity lens to this is not sort of the normal way one would approach stormwater management, but it's incredibly important to ask who gets flooded and who pays to mitigate the flooding. And very, very recent research coming from the P4A Associate Director, Jason Thistlethwaite, and his collaborator, Liton Chakraborty. They've applied a social vulnerability index to a number of communities, including Indigenous communities, to see who is vulnerable to extreme rainfall and to fluvial events. Fluvial is the riverine flooding. And it reveals some surprising things. You know, the more social deprivations that you experience, the more vulnerable you are to these kinds of flood risks in the future. So in this context, the policy environment is really lagging the evidence base. We've got some issues here, and we really need to accelerate our ambition on flood risk, and especially in communities that have vulnerable stormwater infrastructure. A new approach to equity at watershed scale has emerged, and this is work from the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority in Ontario. So looking beyond individual municipalities and approaching stormwater infrastructure management from a watershed lens is really extremely helpful. You're starting to think about who is upstream from you, who's affected downstream from you. And that helps to spread the responsibility of stormwater management. It doesn't quite get to the social equity piece, but there are other ways to do that. So it's one step forward in that space. And then the other thing is to explore the new tools and landowner incentives to get at stormwater management. And we go into some detail in that in the report. The thing that I want to touch on here in terms of some of the hurdles, the majority of stormwater runoff in most Canadian municipalities comes from private properties. And so that landowner piece is really important. It's a public problem with private point sources. So we've got to get to landowners and introduce the interventions on private land. And how stormwater management is funded varies widely across Canada. Some communities, like the city of Waterloo, have a stormwater it's a stormwater fee. Others have it's embedded in property taxes. So there's a lot of variability there that you can dig right in. There's a number of studies on that that are referenced in the report. But finding what's equitable from community to community can sometimes be a real challenge. Just going into the takeaways here. So again, the municipal risk is huge. Canada is extremely flood vulnerable, and the costs are escalating. And that cost is usually shared between, homeowners and their own private insurance, and then the insurance at the different government levels. And so it's big. It's really big. So we need to start thinking about watershed scale and working collectively across watersheds. Finding equitable approaches to funding stormwater so that we're not framing it as a rain tax, but we're getting at the issue that it's an investment in our risk aversion. Mixing gray and green infrastructure. So this is something, I didn't touch on much, but it was a huge part of the discussion that we had, and it's referenced in detail in the report, the value of natural assets. And natural assets can actually show up on municipal financial statements. This is really important. Putting a value to the assets that you have in your community is incredibly important. So this is something that the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative works on. There are, I think, more than 90 communities across Canada who have done some sort of work with the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative. We need more communication and marketing from municipalities to help drive green infrastructure. So green infrastructure as an add-on to the natural assets that already exist within a community, incredibly important. And again, going back to these carrots and sticks, incentivizing landowners and providing the regulation and enforcement tools in order to get the behavioral change happening. Okay, the last case, and then we're going to wrap up and head into Q&A. The last case is Canadian fleet electrification. So why fleet electrification? And this is really interesting, I think, because of the rise of e-commerce, last mile delivery. So much of fleet management happens at the local area, local level, and the impacts, the climate impacts in terms of local air quality, road maintenance, charging infrastructure, traffic control, that's all local. So it's incredibly important if we want to try to get at this, to get at it within the municipal framing. So what roles can Canadian municipalities play? Well, this is the question that we wanted to ask. And it came at a time when the federal government was releasing new targets for zero emission vehicles and releasing new funding. And so we took a close look at this. So, like I said, big government incentives at the federal level through these two programs. Again, the report goes into greater detail. There's a great amount of information coming out. So there are studies from University of Windsor, a Pembina study that is, pretty much the first of its kind. You can look at cases like Bolt Logistics, which is a company that works with IKEA, and they've gone, committed to full electric vehicles in order to service IKEA. There's a great case study from Turku, Finland on fleet electrification. So there's lots of material out there that we can draw from. And then there's also this huge opportunity for municipalities to drive transition through that early adopter status. So, this is a place where the bulkier the orders that we can create, the faster the transition happens, and the easier it is to get capital to flow towards them. This quote came from one of the workshops. I think what we really want to do is look at some of the ways in which we could push fleet electrification forward. So right now there's a lack of certainty around the resale market. Half of fleet vehicles are leased. And so thinking about the secondary and tertiary markets is really important. There's a lack of financial data. So even knowing what the residual values of zero emission vehicles are is important. And participants noted that municipalities have a key role to play in driving fleet electrification, including the behavioral nudges. So there are lots of ways that you can do this. I think there was a study from Norway on how they managed to get a really robust electric vehicle adoption. It was mostly through behavioral nudges. Really, parking privileges for zero emission vehicles was really effective. We also identified the need for a wider range of voices at the table. So many drivers are from immigrant communities and from low-income communities, and these transitions affect them directly. Getting more equitable voices at the table, making the room for them at the table, number one, and then inviting them to come and share their experiences is really important. Okay, so just wrapping up on fleet electrification, here are some of the takeaways. Getting the charging infrastructure right in terms of incentives and supports is really important. In some municipalities, having too many fuels in the mix can make it really difficult. The upfront investment for fleet electrification can really be heavy on the infrastructure side, and making sure that you have the right charging and fuel mix. Making it part of municipal climate action plans. I mean, really embedding it in the implementation strategy is important. And again, just going back to these behavioral nudges, there's lots of case literature there to work from. So I'm just going to wrap up on this and quickly just talk about what's next for us. So we want to open up and have a little bit of a Q&A with Michael Lukowitz and Brent Copperson if anybody has anything that they want to ask us as the project partners. And then after that, we just want to invite you to come over to the network meeting rooms. So I would just suggest maybe heading for table 4, 5, and 6. Brent, Michael, and I can each anchor a table. And then we just want to ask, what kinds of conversations do we need to be having? Who needs to be at the table? And what do you need in order to stay involved in these kinds of conversations? So I'm just now going to quit sharing my screen. Also, the report is at JustGreenCities.ca. We're going to be building out more fulsome microsite around it, including links to the literature that supported the discussion paper. So there will be more resources coming. Just wanted to share that with you. And of course, if you want to stay in touch on this project, you can connect with me directly. I'm julie.a.wright@uwaterloo.ca. And now I will open it up. Oh, Jason Thistlethwaite. In the stormwater research, is there any discussion of using stormwater charges to manage flooding inequity? This tool can be adjusted for risk, more permeable surface on a property, the lower the charge. So presumably the data on vulnerability could be used to index a charge. Yeah, this is definitely something that we need to dive into more detail on. I mean, we were looking at different kinds of programs that cities have in place. And, you know, we were kind of comparing, for instance, City of Waterloo with Peel region. You know, one uses property taxes and the other one is using stormwater fees. So yeah, coming up with more nuanced tools at the municipal level, like I think we should probably dig into that and see how far we could potentially get. It's definitely fodder for a follow-up conversation and something that P4A should be helping to convene that conversation.
Coming up as well.
So I've got one. There are a number of sustainability measurement frameworks for city services and operations. Can you comment on their relative merit? Who uses them well for decision making? There's a few tools that are referenced in the discussion paper, and a lot of stuff that came up in the literature review. So we will be sharing that again, like I said, on the there's an Airtable that we're going to develop for the microsite. But definitely one of the things that we want to learn more about is what is working and why, because it's not a one size fits all sort of situation. It really depends on the size of the municipality and obviously the context around each municipality. Brent, did you want to comment on that any further?
No, I think you covered that.
Okay. And have you worked on the ground with any equity seeking groups, and how do you bring more of these groups to the table? You know, I think all of us have projects, individual projects, where we're working with equity seeking groups. And that kind of work is relationship driven. I mean, you need to co-create projects together, learn to trust each other. And in terms of this conversation, I think that's really where we need to go with it. The next step, you know, we did a little bit of this, creating a floor for future conversations. That's kind of how I think of these discussion papers, is sort of, you know, using the literature and the conversation and what's the research that's already out there, posing some of the questions, kind of better understanding what are the things that we don't know, what are the uncertainties, and then getting a broader conversation going. So for instance, you know, we might want to break into 3 discussion streams, one around fleet electrification, where we're actually, you know, getting into communities and talking to the people who are the drivers of these vehicles to get a better understanding of what they're experiencing. That is a lot of community engagement work, and you need to have good partners in place to do that work. And in some cases, with some communities, you need the right gatekeepers. But definitely what we see is the next step. So we, in the scenario planning process, you know, we've gone through kind of the first couple of phases of scenario planning, where, like I said, creating a floor for the conversation, exploring some of these push-pull factors and the uncertainties. What we would like to do is have a broader, more inclusive table in order to explore futures and create some narratives of what our communities could look like based on these cases. So that's really, I think, we're looking to build a broader coalition of actors who want to stay engaged in that conversation. We're not exactly sure how we're going to do it yet. So again, this idea of co-creation in this next phase is really important to us. And then speaking to how we might be able to bring financing and communities together to get deep retrofit projects happening at the community level. Yeah, again, the discussion paper goes into this to some detail, what the hurdles are for financing. You know, it does highlight an example of the Ottawa Community Housing Project. And I think there's another one coming up in Hamilton recently, where these are kind of non-traditional projects that are combining either deep retrofits or net zero housing and affordable housing. And I think that that's one area where, again, we need to start having more conversations, because there are these pilot projects and we need to look at what's working and how we can bring more actors around that, more, create greater awareness of the financial opportunities, and make sure that communities, in the municipal government space, that they're able to be part of those projects. Any effort to establish benchmarking. There are a lot of different benchmarking activities out there. Like in terms of data tracking, we've got World Council on City Data. We have the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card. This is a good one. Nancy here is saying that we benchmark the stormwater performance of Canadian cities with and without stormwater fees. So yeah, Nancy's been a fantastic reference for us in this project. So yeah, there are lots of different things. I was saying in a previous session at Together Ensemble that one of the things that we should be doing is, creating a clearinghouse for Canadian report cards. John MacArthur and Margaret Biggs in their closing session and yesterday at Together Ensemble talked about that need to get a really thorough benchmarking process going in Canada, and to make it dashboardable so it's visible to people, because this is a big part of the problem is the information is here and it's there, and there's certain people who know where to look and others who don't, so it's tricky. Oh yes, and if you can use the chat to connect with each other on your own projects, that's A+. Yeah, so many pilot projects and embedding lessons learned. Yes. It would be so great if we could actually speak truthfully about lessons learned. This is a real challenge, I think, in convening, is to highlight different projects and to get into the lessons learned aspect of them. So often, especially in our reporting processes, we need to talk about all the successes our project had, but actually going through some of the major challenges is the most valuable part of a convened conversation. So definitely agree with that. Just going along here. Okay, we have 5 minutes remaining. So what I'm just gonna do is pop up that last slide about what we were hoping to talk about, and please meet us over in the networking. So the discussion we were hoping to have, if you have time to meet us, so it's table 4, 5, and 6. What kinds of conversations do we need to be having? Obviously you haven't read the discussion paper, but just, feel free to contact us with ideas that you may have. Who needs to be at the table? We love to hear about who's doing fantastic work or who's not part of the conversation that needs to be part of the conversation. And what do you need to stay involved? That's really critical, because you're here today, but how do we ensure that there's a place for you going forward? What would help you stay part of this conversation? So we'll see you in the networking rooms. Thanks so much.